Sarah Ferguson, formerly the Duchess of York, of course, is considering offers for a tell-all TV interview in the wake of her public downfall.
Have you ever watched someone's whole life change in a single sentence?
It makes people very curious.
That's exactly what royal reporters say happened just minutes ago, when Buckingham Palace quietly confirmed what many insiders feared was coming for years.
Because how can you always be on the front pages wrong?
Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, is being cut off from her remaining royal provisions. No gentle transition, no long soft farewell, just a firm clinical move that makes one thing brutally clear.
Is said to be willing to pay six-figure sums to secure the chat with the former Duchess of York. It would evoke memories of her ex-husband, Andrew Mountbatten's Windsor.
In the eyes of the institution, Fergie is no longer part of the royal future. The wording was cold. Behind closed doors, a senior aide delivered the message to the press. Support for the Duchess of York would be withdrawn. Effective immediately. Not reviewed, not scaled back. Effective immediately. Seasoned journalists who have lived through Diana, through Andrew, through Harry and Meghan said you could feel the air leave the room. Because this didn't sound like an adjustment. It sounded like an execution. On television and online, the headlines came fast. Palace cuts ties with Fergie, Duchess of York fully severed from royal support, end of the road for Sarah Ferguson. But as always with this family, the public line is only half the story.
Andrew's had his chance to tell his story. Now it's Fergie's time. This could be a major headache for the king.
On paper, the explanation is neat. A slimmed-down monarchy, rising costs, a focus on working royals only. In reality, this decision has been stalking Sarah for years, through scandals, debts, political pressure, and an institution that has run out of patience with anyone who carries what they now call reputational risk. To understand how we got here, you have to remember who Sarah used to be: the bubbly redhead who laughed next to Princess Diana, the young duchess who brought noise, color, and chaos into a world that wanted quiet, control, and discipline. She was never the perfect royal, but she was unforgettable. Even after the divorce, even after the toe-sucking headlines and the money troubles, Queen Elizabeth kept her close enough to the family to attend Christmas, to stay at Royal Lodge with Andrew, to linger in that strange gray zone between insider and exile. That gray zone has now been erased.
It doesn't have the protection of the royal family, and she's going to need to make money. This six-figure fee will become seven figures. The juicier the gossip is.
Yes.
So she's going to be sort of pushed towards saying as much as she possibly can.
For years, critics asked why a divorced, non-working duchess was still living in a Crown Estate home, still surrounded by royal protection, still loosely wrapped in the prestige of an institution she no longer served. Supporters replied that she had paid the price already, that she had been humiliated in public and forgiven in private. Tonight's announcement is the answer to that argument. The palace has made its choice. Tonight's announcement isn't just about a house or a security detail. It's about drawing a hard line under an entire era. King Charles has promised a smaller, sharper monarchy, one that can justify every penny and every person it protects. In that vision, there is no space left for a divorced, non-working duchess whose name still triggers old scandals and new questions. For Sarah Ferguson, the safety net that quietly held her for decades has just been cut away. And for the rest of us, one question hangs over everything: why now? And what is the palace really afraid of? To understand why tonight's decision landed like a guillotine, you have to go back to the slow, uncomfortable years where everyone at the palace knew there was a Sarah problem, but nobody wanted to touch it.
She's a slightly more shrewd character than Andrew is. But at the same time, what's she got to lose now? This is the problem. They've cut them loose and they said, you've got to go and make your own way. Can't sign a contract because it's not, we call it the firm, but it's not a business. What are they going to do? They can't do anything about it.
On paper, her position was already strange. She was divorced from Prince Andrew. She had no HRH. She wasn't a working royal, didn't cut ribbons, didn't open hospitals, didn't represent the crown abroad. And yet, there she was, living at Royal Lodge, a grand Crown Estate property, walking the dogs on Windsor grounds, slipping in and out of the same world she'd supposedly left in the 1990s. For the late Queen, this was manageable. Elizabeth was guided by loyalty and memory. Fergie was the mother of her beloved granddaughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. She'd been humiliated, yes, but she'd also been forgiven, at least privately. As long as the Queen sat on the throne, Sarah existed in a kind of royal twilight, never fully in, never fully out, but always somehow protected. That twilight started to dim the moment Charles became king. He inherited a family, yes, but he also inherited a crisis. Public trust battered by scandals, endless headlines about Andrew, lingering fallout from Harry and Meghan, and a cost of living crisis making taxpayers look much harder at every palace gate and royal roof.
The problem with Sarah Ferguson, Paul, is that she knows where the bodies are buried.
Yeah, she's been out. Didn't they get married at about 86? That's now 40 years ago nearly. She knows absolutely everything.
Inside meeting rooms, advisors stopped using gentle words like awkward and started using hard ones like exposure and risk. In those risk assessments, Sarah's name was underlined again and again. She had a history of financial trouble. She had been caught in embarrassing stings. Her judgment, fair or not, was widely questioned. And, most damaging of all, she was still openly attached to Andrew, the one figure the palace most desperately wanted to disappear from public conversation. Every time she appeared at Royal Lodge, every time her name was linked to crown property, the questions returned. Why is she still there? Who is paying for this? Why does a monarchy that claims to be modern still quietly support a woman whose scandals are older than some of its younger fans? For a while, the palace tried to ride it out, hoping the noise would move on. But the noise didn't move on, it grew. Behind closed doors, the mood hardened. Senior courtiers began to talk about Sarah not as Fergie, the slightly chaotic relative, but as a structural problem in Charles's new design. The king wants a slimmed-down monarchy that he can defend point by point. He can justify funding for the monarch, the heir, and a tiny supporting cast of full-time workers. What he cannot justify in 2025 is a divorced ex-duchess with no job for the crown living in a royal house, while ordinary families are counting every bill.
She knows everything about Andrew, so she could dish the dirt on him, but she also knows everything about Diana, because they were close friends. She knows everything about Charles and the relationship with Camilla. She knows everything about Anne and Edward. It would be quite literally the royal scoop of the century.
It doesn't matter that Beatrice and Eugenie adore her. It doesn't matter that the Queen once shielded her. The institution thinks long-term, and long-term, Sarah Ferguson looked like a loose thread that could unravel the whole narrative of reform. Tonight's announcement is the moment the thread was finally cut. If the announcement felt brutal to royal watchers, it was nothing compared to what it means for the two people who know Sarah Ferguson not as the Duchess of York, but simply as Mum, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. For most of their lives, Royal Lodge has been the backdrop of their reality. Birthday parties under its trees, photos on the front steps, late-night kitchen conversations when the cameras were gone and the tabloids had moved on. To the public, it's just another grand house on the Windsor estate. To them, it's their childhood, their safe place, the one corner of the royal world that still felt like home, even as everything else, marriages, titles, reputations, cracked around them. That's why insiders say they saw the storm coming long before tonight's headlines. They sat through briefings where rationalization of the estate was discussed in cool, technical language. They heard the polite phrases about aligning occupation with working roles. They watched as their father, Prince Andrew, was pushed further and further from view after the Epstein fallout. Every time his name came up, so did Royal Lodge. And every time Royal Lodge came up, their mother's position followed.
She is a money-grabbing grifter, right? Cash is her commodity. It's what she lives for. She's profligate. She still thinks she's a member of the royal family. She lives beyond her means and always has.
For years, Beatrice and Eugenie tried to manage the impossible, loving their parents fiercely while knowing that, to the institution, those same parents had become liabilities. They built independent careers and did everything they could to be seen as modern and uncontroversial, but no matter how quietly they behaved, they could never detach themselves from the house their parents shared or from the question nobody at the palace wanted to say out loud. How long could the monarchy keep supporting a property that symbolized two of its most complicated figures? Behind the scenes, friends say the sisters began drawing up contingency plans, private rental options, time spent abroad, discreet conversations with advisors outside the royal bubble about mortgages and legal rights. Not because they wanted to abandon Royal Lodge, but because they could feel what was coming. A day when their mother would no longer be cushioned by unspoken understandings and old-fashioned loyalty. Tonight is that day. With the palace signaling that support for Sarah is ending, Beatrice and Eugenie are being pushed into a role no royal child ever wants, acting as a bridge between an unforgiving institution and a parent who may suddenly find herself standing outside the gates with no safety net. They will be expected to smile on balconies and quietly project stability, all while privately deciding where their mother will live, how she will cope, and how much of their own future they are willing to sacrifice to keep her afloat.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because she's always, in a way, been something of a thorn in the side of the royal family.
Yeah.
You know, this is a woman that brought headlines about toe sucking back in the day, following her divorce from Andrew. And she always cut quite a sort of comical figure within royal circles. She was uncouth.
In Charles's blueprint for a slimmed-down monarchy, this is the cost nobody puts in the press release. You can trim the family tree on paper, but you cannot erase the fact that behind every reputational risk, there are children who still see a parent, not a problem. And tonight, those children are being told that the institution is moving on, whether their family is ready or not. Publicly, this will be sold as a tidy, boring thing, a neutral reorganization under a slimmed-down monarchy. But nothing in the royal world is ever just administrative. The timing, the tone, and the target all point to one simple reality. This is strategy. Inside Charles's court, the mood has hardened since the Queen died. The new king is ruling in a different era. Every check questioned, every property mapped, every non-working royal turned into a talking point. Sarah Ferguson sits at the intersection of everything they're trying to get away from. She is the face of 90s scandal, messy finances, tabloid deals, toe-sucking headlines, and all the things Charles's team wants voters and taxpayers to forget. Behind closed doors, senior aides haven't just been asking, can we afford this? They've been asking, can we still sell this? Royal Lodge is expensive. Security is expensive. Protecting the optics around a divorced ex-royal living in grace and favor luxury is even more expensive. There's another motive quietly at work, Andrew. The palace can't publicly rehabilitate him, and it can't fully disown him. He's the Queen's son, the King's brother, and his presence is a permanent bruise on the institution's image. As long as Sarah lives under the same roof, smiling at the same windows, the whole story sits there on the Windsor estate like a monument to everything the monarchy wants to pretend it has moved past. Cutting off Sarah isn't just about her. It's a way of shrinking the visual footprint of the Andrew era without having to wage open war on a blood prince. Remove her, destabilize the domestic setup at Royal Lodge, and suddenly there's more room to argue that the property itself should be repurposed, downsized, or quietly taken back into full crown control. Then there's the long game, William's future reign. Everything Charles does now is being watched through the lens of what his son will inherit. William has already made it clear he wants a monarchy that feels lean, relatable, and defensible. That means fewer hangers-on, fewer half-roles, fewer sort of royal figures enjoying perks without responsibilities. From that angle, Sarah becomes a test case. If Charles can't deal with a single ex-duchess who has been on the edges for decades, how can William later justify cutting anyone else? Drawing a hard line with Fergie now sets a precedent for a much tougher, more corporate-style monarchy later. And finally, there is the media factor. Palace staff know that the press, especially abroad, loves Sarah. She gives good quotes. She is warm, chaotic, emotional, and never quite polished. That makes her dangerous. A woman like that, with decades of stories and nothing left to lose, is every producer's dream. The more she struggles financially, the more appealing big money interviews, ghost-written books, and streaming deals will look. By stepping away from her now, the palace hopes to control the narrative, to frame this as a dignified end to a complicated relationship, not as a panicked reaction to some future tell-all. Whether that gamble pays off depends on one thing they cannot script: how Sarah chooses to respond once the dust settles and the reality of life without royal scaffolding truly hits. For Sarah Ferguson, tonight's announcement isn't just a line in a statement, it's a full stop at the end of a 40-year chapter. For almost her entire adult life, the royal family has been the backdrop of every decision: the marriage, the divorce, the scandals, the comebacks, the TV deals, the children, even the house she sleeps in. Now, for the first time since the 1980s, she's being told, in the most brutal, polite way the monarchy knows, you're on your own. Practically, that means things most people never have to think about. Where does she live if Royal Lodge is no longer an option she can rely on? How does she fund proper security without the quiet cushion of institutional support? Which invitations stop arriving once the palace has officially stepped back? Friends say she'll lean on the same things she's always leaned on: work, hustle, charm, books, television, speaking, anything that pays the bills and keeps her visible. But here's the twist that makes the palace nervous. The more she needs to earn, the more valuable her inside story becomes. Sarah has seen everything: the late Queen's private kindness, Andrew's rise and fall, the young princes growing up, the marriages, the feuds, the panic behind the scenes when the outside world turns ugly. For years, she held back just enough to preserve a fragile peace with the institution. Now, that restraint will be tested. Does she keep protecting a system that has finally, formally stopped protecting her? Or does she decide that her survival and her daughter's security matter more than preserving royal comfort, even if she never sits down for a blockbuster tell-all, even if she only hints, implies, or lets others speak for her? The possibility alone is enough to keep palace communications teams awake at night. And that's the hidden irony in all of this. The move that was supposed to de-risk the monarchy may have created a brand new risk, a free, unbound Sarah Ferguson with nothing left to lose except her silence. Charles and his advisors are betting that she will choose dignity, that Beatrice and Eugenie will quietly encourage stability over spectacle, that time and distance will cool the sting of tonight's decision. They are betting that the public will see this as necessary reform, not cruelty. They are betting that by cutting away the messier figures from the edges, they can present a cleaner, sharper, more respectable royal core. But royalty has never been tidy. It has always been at its most human in the people who don't quite fit. The ex-wives, the black sheep, the ones who stumble, fall, and keep trying to claw their way back. Sarah has been all of those things. That's why so many ordinary people instinctively like her, even when they shake their heads at her choices. So the question now isn't just what happens to her, it's what happens to the monarchy's story. Does this become a quiet footnote in Charles's modernization, the day he finally drew a line under the 1990s? Or does it become the start of a new, uncomfortable narrative about a king who cuts loose the inconvenient and a duchess who eventually decides to tell the world exactly what it feels like to be left standing outside the gates? For now, the palace has made its move. The next one belongs to Sarah,